The champagne cork popped high into the morning sky, glinting like a shooting star before crashing down into my property. A crowd of strangers in expensive sunglasses cheered and clinked glasses beneath a massive grand opening banner strung across a building that wasn't supposed to exist. Right there, standing where my horses used to graze, was a sprawling luxury resort, pools, tennis courts, valet parking, and Karen, the HOA president, laughing like she owned the place. You're probably wondering how I got here, how a bunch of power-hungry suburbanites turned my quiet land into a billionaire's playground, and why, instead of fighting them, I let them finish the job and sold the whole mess right out from under them for billions. If you had asked me back then what I loved most about my life, I would have said the land. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just the land. My family's stretch of earth out here at the edge of Pine Hollow County was more than soil and trees and water. It was a living thing. My grandfather had bought the original parcel back when the town was nothing more than a dusty road and a bait shop. Over the years, through floods and droughts, through bad harvests and good, it stayed ours. We had rolling pastures, a cluster of cottonwoods by the west fence line, and a small, lazy creek that wandered through the middle like a silver thread stitching the whole world together. When my grandfather passed, the land skipped a generation, landing in my hands through a series of paperwork filings he had carefully orchestrated, trusting me to carry on what he started. I did not just live here, I belonged here, and for a while it felt like the world had forgotten us out here in the best possible way. The days were slow, honest, and predictable. Until they were not. The first letter came on a Wednesday, buried between a seed catalog and a farm equipment flyer. It was embossed with a gold seal I did not recognize and printed on thick, fancy paper that smelled like a department store perfume counter. Notice of Community Integration Initiative, it said at the top. Harmless enough words on their own, but the moment I started reading, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The newly expanded Willow Bend Homeowners Association was extending its boundaries, it said, to better maintain community standards and enhance the living experience for all property owners in the adjoining areas. The adjoining areas meaning me. I tossed the letter on the kitchen table and tried to forget about it. Folks around here did not take kindly to outsiders telling them what color to paint their barns or how often to mow their fields. Surely it was just a mistake, a wrong address, a formality. It was not a mistake. 2 weeks later, I found a plastic sign staked into the gravel drive leading up to my house, flapping lazily in the breeze. Future site of Willow Bend Beautification Project Phase 1. No explanation, no permission asked, just a bright blue logo and a website link that led nowhere. I yanked the sign out of the ground and threw it into the burn barrel, but it left a deep, uneasy feeling lodged in my chest. I started seeing more signs around the outskirts of the property, little clusters of workers in reflective vests poking at the earth with measuring rods and taking photos of nothing in particular. When I asked them what they were doing, they mumbled about survey updates and public records compliance before packing up and leaving without so much as looking me in the eye. A month later, I got another letter, this one colder, more official. Notice of minor zoning adjustment. A quiet change to the town charter, it said. A reclassification from agricultural preserve to community enhancement zone. I read it 3 times before the meaning sunk in. Under the new rules, any property improvements or developments deemed beneficial to the wider neighborhood could be authorized without direct landowner consent, provided a certain number of stakeholder approvals were obtained. I knew enough about legal games to recognize what was happening. They were building a back door into my land, rewriting the rules while pretending it was all above board. I hired a lawyer out of Elmwood, a sharp old cowboy who had seen every dirty trick in the book. He filed objections, demanded public hearings, challenged the procedural notices. Every time he made progress, the HOA shuffled the deck. They scheduled meetings at impossible hours, posted agendas on bulletin boards no one visited, issued new notices in tiny print buried in classified ads of newspapers no one read. It was a war fought in fine print and footnotes. And no matter how fast we chased them, they stayed one step ahead, slipping through loopholes they had written themselves. Still, I fought. Every morning I walked the fence lines, checking for new survey markers, pulling down unauthorized signs, documenting every intrusion with my old Nikon camera. It became a ritual, a form of resistance, a way of saying, not yet, not today, not without a fight. In the middle of all this, life threw me a curveball I could not ignore. My brother was getting married out in Montana, and I was asked to be his best man. Family being family, I could not say no. I made sure to leave clear instructions for my neighbor, Earl, a tough old rancher who agreed to keep an eye on things while I was gone. I locked every gate, put up fresh, no trespassing signs, and prayed that 2 weeks away would not bring disaster. I was wrong. The moment I pulled back into the gravel drive, I knew something was off. The air smelled different, like new concrete and cheap paint. The birds were gone, the lazy hum of crickets replaced by the distant whine of machinery. I rounded the bend and slammed the brakes so hard the truck skidded. Where there had been open pasture, there was now a concrete foundation stretching across the landscape like a scar. Steel beams stabbed into the sky, wrapped in plastic tarps bearing the words Willow Bend Resort Spa. A construction crane loomed over my cottonwoods. Their branches hacked back to make room for the access road that now snaked right through the middle of the old hayfield. Bulldozers had ripped out the old fences, their skeletal remains piled in sad heaps along the creek bank. The creek itself had been choked and rerouted, forced into a sterile concrete culvert that looked more like a drainage ditch than a living thing. A young man in a hard hat approached my truck, clipboard in hand, smile too wide to be sincere. "Morning, sir," he chirped, ignoring the fact that my fists were clenched white around the steering wheel. "Homeowners will be notified of community benefits shortly." I did not say a word. I just stared at him, at the absurd bright orange vest stretched over his scrawny chest, at the stupid laminated badge swinging from his neck that said Development Liaison. Finally, I threw the truck into reverse, backing away slowly, not trusting myself to speak without putting my fist through his clipboard. Inside the house, I found a stack of mail shoved through the slot, all bearing the same cheery gold seal. Notice of enhancement commencement. Updated community development map. Invitation to grand opening ceremony. Not a single one offering me a choice. Not a single one asking permission. Earl showed up that evening, hat in hand, looking more rattled than I had ever seen him. He told me they came with bulldozers and trucks 3 days after I left, armed with court papers stamped and signed. Claimed it was all legal, that the town council had authorized it under the new zoning regulations. When Earl tried to intervene, they threatened him with trespassing charges. He tried calling me, but the calls never got through. I checked my phone, no missed calls, no voicemails. Later, I would learn my service had been mysteriously interrupted for the entire duration of my trip. I sat on the porch that night, staring out at the blinking construction lights that dotted the ruins of my home like a sick parody of stars. Somewhere across the valley, a generator droned like a dying animal. I thought about my grandfather, about the calloused hands that had turned this land from wild scrub into something worth fighting for. About the quiet mornings when the mist would rise off the creek and the world felt clean and unbreakable, and I thought about what they had taken from me. The land was not just gone, it had been stolen, piece by piece, loophole by loophole, under cover of lies and half-truths. They thought I was beaten, that I would pack up and leave like so many others before me, that I would fold quietly, just another casualty of progress. They thought wrong. The next few weeks were not about rebuilding, they were about surviving. If I thought the resort construction alone was bad, the real storm had only just begun. The Willow Bend HOA, emboldened by whatever fake legal power they thought they had over me, unleashed their next wave of attacks, not with bulldozers this time, but with paper cuts. It started with a notice taped to my front door. Violation, unauthorized structures. A $500 fine for the old tool shed that had stood behind the house since 1964, grandfathered into every zoning map and county record I could find. Then another notice the next day. Violation, non-compliant landscaping. Another, $250 fine because the pasture grass, ripped apart by their construction crews, was now classified as invasive growth. 2 days later, a third fine, this time for unauthorized signage. because I had tacked up a piece of plywood spray, painted with the words, "Private property, no trespassing," across the entrance where their trucks kept barreling through. They were not subtle. The construction crews deliberately started their loudest work at 4 in the morning, jackhammering, shouting, and shining industrial floodlights right into my bedroom windows. Cement mixers roared all day, backup alarms beeped endlessly through the nights, and the dust kicked up from their worksite hung so thick over my house that I had to change the air filters twice a week just to breathe inside. Strangers in hard hats wandered onto what little land I had left unpaved, sometimes carrying clipboards, sometimes holding cameras, always pretending not to see me glaring at them from the porch. It was not long before I found footprints across my vegetable garden, tire tracks pressed deep into the flower beds my mother had planted when she was still alive. My land, once a sanctuary, had become a war zone. At first, I tried to keep up with it, documenting every fine, photographing every trespass, filing complaints with the town clerk. But the clerk's office, once a bastion of common-sense country law, had been infiltrated too. Every complaint was acknowledged with a hollow, automated email thanking me for my concerns and assuring me they would be reviewed in accordance with community enhancement guidelines. I knew what that meant. No one was coming to help. If anything was going to change, I would have to be the one to change it. It was during one of my midnight walks along the creek bed, what was left of it anyway, that I noticed something odd about the runoff. A thick, oily film floated on the surface, glowing faintly under the moonlight. It had not been there before. Kneeling down, I scooped a jarful of the water and capped it, making a note to bring it into the lab at the agricultural college 2 towns over where an old friend still worked. The results came back ugly. High concentrations of construction debris, chemical runoff from sealants and paints, and even traces of heavy metals like lead and mercury. It was not just unsightly, it was illegal. That was when I realized this was bigger than my land. Much bigger. The final piece clicked into place when I stumbled onto a discarded folder behind the temporary fencing near the construction site. Someone must have dropped it, thinking nothing of it. Inside were blueprints and stamped approval forms for the resort project. But the dates did not add up. The environmental impact report, the key document required to greenlight any major development like this, was dated 6 months before the HOA had even held the community meetings claiming to be seeking feedback. Worse, the report itself was laughably fake. Entire sections were copied and pasted from a project proposal for a shopping center 3 counties away, complete with the wrong geographic coordinates still visible in the margins. I dug deeper, cross-referencing the signatures on the documents against public records. The engineer listed as the certifying authority, retired 5 years ago. The environmental consultant, no longer licensed. The supposed community survey, showing overwhelming support for the project, names of people who had either moved away years ago or in one case died. It was a house of cards built on top of a mountain of lies, and now that I had proof, all I had to do was blow hard enough to bring it down. But not yet. I realized something then, sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by piles of stolen documents and printed emails. They wanted me to fight back. They wanted me to lose my temper, to sue prematurely, to stomp into court waving half-finished evidence and get laughed out by some judge already half-bought by their lawyers. They wanted me to become the angry hick in their story, the backward relic standing in the way of progress. If I gave them that, they would win. No, I needed to play this smarter. So I smiled. I paid the fake fines without protest. I waved politely at the construction crews as they tore up more of my fields. I attended the new community meetings at the resort's temporary office, sitting quietly at the back, nodding along as Karen Mitchell, the Queen Bee president of the Willow Bend HOA, spun tales about community revitalization and harmonious land use. I even volunteered for their so-called beautification committee, earning suspicious looks from the board members but disarming them with my bland, eager compliance. Let them think they had broken me, let them underestimate me. That was always their mistake. Meanwhile, I built my arsenal. I installed hidden cameras facing every inch of my remaining property, recording every trespass, every illegal dumping of construction debris into the creek, every unpermitted vehicle that crossed onto my land without authorization. I set up remote backups so that even if they found the cameras and destroyed them, the footage would already be safe, encrypted, and duplicated in 3 separate locations. I combed through public land records, pulling every shady transaction the HOA board had touched in the past 5 years. I found kickbacks disguised as landscaping contracts, sweetheart deals on public maintenance bids, and suspicious donations to town council members who had mysteriously voted in favor of rezoning my land. I discovered that the president of the HOA, Karen Mitchell, was not just a busybody with a clipboard. She was the silent partner in a shell company called Pine Horizon Development LLC, the very same company contracted to manage the construction of the resort. 2 other board members, Doug Fisher and Rachel Hensley, were listed as consultants. The HOA was not some independent civic group trying to protect property values. It was a front, a weaponized mob designed to harass the old landowners, drive them out, and pave the way, literally, for these parasites to make millions off stolen soil. Every discovery made me angrier, but I did not show it. I smiled wider. I nodded harder. I let them believe the fines and noise and trespassing had broken my spirit, that I was just another stubborn old fool trying to cling to a past the world had already forgotten. Meanwhile, the trap was tightening. At night, I plotted timelines, mapped connections, traced the flow of dirty money. Every morning, I showed up at the HOA's coffee meetings and volunteered to pick up trash along the new walking trails. I listened to their careless gossip, their bragging about the kickbacks disguised as consulting fees, their jokes about hicks who do not know when to leave. I played my role so well that when Karen finally suggested publicly that maybe it was time for me to consider a more suitable living arrangement, I smiled and thanked her for her concern. They thought they were winning. They thought they had already buried me under fines, noise, concrete, and fake smiles. They had no idea I was still digging, but not down, up, towards something they would never see coming. The invitation came wrapped in gold-embossed cardstock so thick it could have doubled as body armor. Willow Bend Resort, Spa, Grand Opening Celebration. It announced in curling script, with a glittering RSVP number printed at the bottom. Formal attire suggested, no children allowed, champagne reception on the terrace. The nerve of it made me laugh. They had destroyed my land, paved over my creek, cut down my grandfather's trees, poisoned the soil, and now they wanted me to stand there clapping like a trained seal while they popped champagne and patted each other on the back. I tossed the invitation onto the kitchen counter next to the worn leather folder that held my real ticket into the party, the one that mattered. The ancient covenant was older than every HOA rule, older than any zoning adjustment or council vote they had rigged. I found it buried deep in the county archives, a dusty, brittle document handwritten in neat looping script on parchment that still smelled faintly of old ink and damp earth. Signed in 1894, it laid out the rights of the original homesteaders, guaranteeing their land and water access in perpetuity, free from subdivision, reassignment, or condemnation, unless by their direct heirs or through clear and willing sale. No easements, no forced integration into municipalities, no exceptions. It was a relic from another era, a piece of the past so deeply embedded in the legal framework that not even decades of developer money and political favors could erase it without the direct consent of the landowner. And they had never gotten mine. The resort's grand opening unfolded like a fever dream of the suburban rich. Valets in matching blazers whisked away shiny SUVs, and women in glittering cocktail dresses teetered on high heels across the brand-new cobblestone courtyard. A jazz quartet played near the outdoor bar, the brassy notes swirling into the warm evening air. Waiters floated by with trays of bacon-wrapped scallops and artisanal flatbreads, all under strings of fairy lights that crisscrossed the polished courtyard where my wheat used to grow. The centerpiece was the clubhouse, a sprawling monstrosity of fake stone and polished wood beams, its entrance crowned by a gleaming metal sign. Willow Bend Resort Spa, a new standard in community excellence. I stood outside the entrance for a long moment, breathing in the scent of expensive perfume and fresh asphalt, letting the weight of what I was about to do settle on my shoulders. Then I straightened my jacket, nothing fancy, just a clean denim coat over a black button-up shirt and dark jeans, and walked through the archway, the ancient covenant tucked safely under my arm. The security guards barely glanced at me. Why would they? I was nobody to them, just another face among the crowd. I moved quickly, slipping through the throngs of guests until I reached the heart of the gathering. A raised stage flanked by oversized banners showing artists' renderings of the future wellness expansion, private residences, and executive golf course. At the podium stood Karen Mitchell, draped in an evening gown that sparkled under the lights, her hair piled into a carefully sculpted helmet of blonde ambition. "Tonight," she was saying into the microphone, her voice oozing false humility, "we celebrate not just a development, but a dream realized. A community built on vision, perseverance, and partnership." I stepped forward. Several people turned to look at me as I moved toward the stage, but no one stopped me. Not yet. I waited until Karen reached the crescendo of her speech, the part about overcoming obstacles and preserving the spirit of Willow Bend, before I climbed the steps and tapped her politely on the shoulder. She turned, startled, and the microphone picked up the brittle edge in her voice. "Excuse me, sir, this is a private—" "Actually," I said calmly, taking the mic from her hand with 2 fingers, "this is public land, or at least it was supposed to be." The crowd stirred, a ripple of confused murmurs spreading through the courtyard. Karen stepped back, her face flushing red under her makeup. I raised the battered leather folder high above my head. "My name is Samuel Holloway," I said, my voice steady and carrying through the speakers. "And this land, every square inch of it, is still protected under the Holloway Covenant of 1894. That covenant, recorded with the county, grants exclusive rights to the original homesteaders and their descendants. It prohibits forced annexation, overrides zoning changes, and nullifies any development that occurs without direct permission from the landowner." I paused, letting the words sink in. Across the courtyard, cameras from the local news outlets tilted toward the stage like flowers following the sun. I smiled and continued. "I never sold this land. I never agreed to any rezoning. I never signed any development contract. What you are standing on, what you have built your tennis courts, your spa, your overpriced condos on, is still private property, and every inch of it has been constructed illegally." Gasps echoed through the courtyard. Karen tried to snatch the microphone back, but I sidestepped easily, pulling out copies of the covenant and tossing them into the air like confetti. The papers fluttered down among the guests, some snagging in their hair, others landing neatly on cocktail tables and in wine glasses. "If you would like further proof," I said, smiling thinly, "I invite you to review the public records, the forged environmental reports, the fake zoning approvals, and the conflict of interest filings conveniently omitted by your beloved HOA board." At that moment, the sirens wailed. 2 police cruisers and a white van bearing the city inspector's logo pulled up to the curb. Behind them came a convoy of lawyers from the county office, some looking grim, others almost eager. They had been waiting for this. I had made sure of it. Karen stumbled backward, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Doug Fisher, one of the board members, tried to slip away toward the parking lot, but an officer intercepted him. Rachel Hensley collapsed into a chair, her head in her hands. City inspectors swarmed the construction site like ants, pulling out clipboards, taking samples of runoff from the drainage ditches, photographing violations. A county official with a megaphone ordered the immediate suspension of all resort operations pending an investigation into zoning fraud, environmental contamination, and illegal construction. The guests scattered, their glittering dresses and tailored suits disappearing into the night like cockroaches when the lights come on. Champagne glasses shattered on the concrete as waiters dropped their trays in the panic. The jazz band fell silent, the last note hanging in the air like the final heartbeat of a dying dream. Karen rushed toward me, her heels clicking desperately against the stones. "You can't do this," she hissed. "This is our future, our investment. You're ruining everything." "No, Karen," I said quietly, folding the leather folder back under my arm. "You did that all by yourself." As the officials moved in, seizing documents, photographing violations, and handing out citations like Halloween candy, I turned away from the stage and walked slowly back across the courtyard. The air smelled cleaner now, less like cheap perfume and fresh asphalt, and more like rain and earth, like home. I paused at the archway, taking one last look at the flashing lights, the crumbling facade of greed and arrogance collapsing under the weight of truth. The war was not over yet, not by a long shot, but for the first time in a long time I could see the tide turning. And it was beautiful. The fallout was swift, brutal, and for once, beautifully deserved. By the next morning, news trucks clogged the narrow county roads leading into Willow Bend. Helicopters circled low over the resort, capturing aerial footage of half-finished tennis courts, muddy parking lots, and the half-built spa already beginning to sink into the improperly compacted soil. Local headlines screamed corruption, fraud, environmental disaster. National networks picked it up by lunchtime, spinning the story into a symbol of suburban greed gone horribly wrong. Willow Bend Resort. Built on lies, read one Chiron. Another blared, "Oh, from Hellface's reckoning." It was the kind of attention no luxury development survives. Karen Mitchell resigned as HOA president by sundown, though she tried to spin it as a personal health decision in a shaky Facebook post that barely scraped together a dozen pity likes before the comments were disabled. Doug Fisher lawyered up immediately, and Rachel Hensley was last seen loading garbage bags full of shredded documents into the trunk of her Volvo while a local reporter filmed her from across the street. The remaining board members scattered like pigeons hit with a fire hose, their official HOA website quietly taken offline, their fancy newsletters replaced with silence. Meanwhile, my phone rang off the hook. Developers, lawyers, PR firms, even a handful of community liaisons who wanted to open a dialogue about mutually beneficial outcomes. They all said the same thing once you cut through the legalese: they were desperate. The construction was frozen indefinitely. The permits were invalid. The environmental damage alone would take years and millions of dollars to mitigate, assuming the EPA did not bring the hammer down even harder. The resort was dead in the water. Every day the unfinished site sat there was another day of lost revenue, ballooning debts, and angry investors breathing down their necks. They needed a solution, fast. And I had it. See, while they were busy bulldozing my land and throwing parties, I had been busy too. I owned the rights. The original homesteader covenant gave me absolute control. No leases, no easements, no settlements. If I wanted to, I could have forced them to tear the entire thing down, brick by brick, at their own expense. I could have sued them into oblivion, dragging the court battle out for decades. I could have left it to rot, a half-finished ruin that would poison their balance sheets until they collapsed under their own stupidity. But where is the fun in that? I made them an offer instead. One that would sting worse than losing the land ever could. The negotiations were short, brutal. I insisted every meeting be held on my property under a battered canopy tent overlooking the construction site, forcing them to sit in the dust and heat like they had made me. Their suits turned damp with sweat within minutes. Their polished shoes sank into the soft earth their own runoff had ruined. I watched their faces as I laid it out. They would buy the land every square foot outright, no leases, no joint ownership, no strings, and they would pay not market value, not even double market value. They would pay what it was worth to save their own skins. I named my price with a straight face and a steady voice. $3 billion. Dead silence followed. You could have heard a pin drop on the cracked asphalt. They balked, of course. They sputtered and threatened lawsuits and bankruptcy filings and counteroffers. I let them. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, nodding along like I was considering it. Then I pulled out my trump cards, one by one. The environmental reports showing toxic runoff, the leaked emails coordinating illegal zoning changes, the drone footage of them dumping contaminated soil into the creek. I slid photos across the table of the illegal drainage culverts, the falsified community surveys, the unauthorized utility hookups. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten. I just let them look at the mountain of evidence stacked against them, the slow dawning horror settling into their bloodless faces. By the end of the week, they caved. The wire transfer cleared on a Tuesday morning at 9:04 a.m. I watched the numbers flicker across my laptop screen, an avalanche of zeros that barely seemed real. My lawyer, who had spent his entire career wrestling crooked developers, actually let out a choked laugh when he saw the final amount. "You didn't just win," he said, shaking his head. "You ended them." The resort sold a month later at a massive loss to a foreign holding company that planned to demolish the whole thing and turn the land into a nature preserve. The bank foreclosed on the developer's other properties. Lawsuits sprang up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Careers were ruined, reputations burned to ash. Karen Mitchell's McMansion went up for auction 2 towns over, a sad little listing tucked between foreclosure notices. Doug Fisher disappeared to Florida, last rumored to be selling timeshares. Rachel Hensley tried to rebrand herself as a community consultant, but a quick Google search torpedoed every client meeting before she could even pitch her services. As for the Willow Bend HOA, it officially dissolved 6 months later, citing insurmountable financial and administrative challenges. No farewell letter, no apology. Just silence and weeds growing over their precious manicured entrances. And me? I stayed. I rebuilt my grandfather's house, not with newfangled concrete or synthetic siding, but with honest wood and stone, the way it was meant to be. I let the creek reclaim its old path, winding lazily through fields that were once again filled with wildflowers instead of rebar and debris. I planted cottonwoods along the bank, their roots sinking deep into the earth, anchoring the land that no HOA, no developer, no power-hungry suburban warlord could ever touch again. I built a porch on the east side of the house, the perfect place to sit and watch the sunrise spread gold across the valley. And every morning, I made a cup of coffee, pulled on my boots, and stepped out into a world that was finally, truly mine again. A new sign stood at the old road where their fancy entrance had once been. Nothing flashy, just a simple wooden plank, hand-painted in bold black letters. Sold. Future site of karma. I sipped my coffee, letting the steam rise into the cool morning air, and smiled. Some debts take a while to collect. But when they do, they are sweeter than anything money can buy.